Now, in this episode, we're going to continue our look at one-hit wonders. Now, this time, we're going to pick one-hit wonders from the 70s. Now, like I said in the previous episode, I don't mean this to be an insult to any of these artists or acts. I mean, it's a thrill to have a hit record in the top 10 or top 20. But many of these groups are defined by that one song, even though they may have recorded many, many other songs. Now, as usual, my criteria for picking these one-hit wonders is they had to have a hit in the top 20, and they could only have one in their career. So you ready to jump in that time machine and go back to the 1970s and crank up the stereo? Let's drop the needle. This is not going to be a comprehensive list. It's just going to be some songs that I like. So our first one-hit wonder started out in a band which was called Dr. West's Medicine Show and Junk Band. And they recorded a song which was called The Eggplant That Ate Chicago. But that record went nowhere, so the band broke up, and Norman Greenbaum decided to go out on his own. And yes, the one hit that he had was Spirit in the Sky. Now, Norman presented the record company with a demo, which was basically him just playing acoustic guitar. The record company decided that the song needed more than that, so they beefed it up with a lot of more instruments and even gospel singers. As a result, Norman originally had a very tough time of playing it live, and so when he would appear on TV shows, he would lip sync it. By the way, Norman says his inspiration for the song is the old westerns that we all grew up watching, because it was always the bad guy who said he wanted to die with his boots on so he could go meet the spirit in the sky. Well, whatever the inspiration, it was one hit for Norman Greenbaum. Next up is one of my favorite songs from a band that formed in 1969 in New York, and they were called Mountain. And the lead guitarist and vocalist was Leslie West, and their song is The Great Mississippi Queen. Great guitar riff, great song. And I've got a story about this, a personal story. When Mississippi Queen came out, it was really a hard rocker, and this was right at the time where radio stations were changing formats away from the Boss Jock radio to the underground radio. Now, what was Boss Jock? Well, Boss Jock was basically where the DJs would scream and talk over the lead-in of the song. So as the song was playing, they're still talking to you. And generally, they weren't really saying much about the band. They were just trying to be clever so that whatever they last said would go real well with whatever the first lyric of the song was that came in. I was working at an underground station in LA at the time, and the underground jocks were much more laid back and way cool, and we respected the music. We would never talk over any of the music, even the lead-in to the song. And in fact, a little-known fact is that on the record sometimes, it would tell the disc jockey how many seconds there were before the vocal started, so they could time their Boss Jock talk right over that intro. Anyway, underground radio, we didn't do that. So on the station, I got this idea that we needed to have a station ID, a commercial, which differentiated us from the Boss Jock radio stations that were still around. So I decided to do this spot where I played Mississippi Queen. And over the beginning of it, over the lead-in, I'm doing my best Boss Jock imitation, and I'm just screaming, and I'm just yelling, and I'm talking about my girlfriend, and she was really cool, and she looked just like a... And then Leslie West would go, Mississippi Queen. It was just typical Boss Jock nonsense. And then I would interrupt the song, and in my normal voice, I would say, well, you're never going to hear that on this radio station. Now we're going to play Mississippi Queen. And then I would play the song from the beginning so you'd hear the introduction without the Boss Jock over it. Our next artists are a duo, Mike Brewer and Tom Shipley. They were playing folk songs in clubs around LA, but they kind of got burned out with the LA scene. and decided to go back to the Midwest and live in Missouri. And they started playing little college gigs around the Midwest. But it was their album that was called Tarkio that really shot them to fame and had their one-hit wonder. Now, Tarkio was named after a little town in Missouri, Tarkio, Missouri. And their one-hit wonder was the song One Toke Over the Line. And the story behind this is Mike Brewer says that they were both so stoned one night that Tom said to him, "I think I'm one toke over the line." And Mike loved that lyric, and so he decided to write a song around it. And it became their only top 10 hit. The song also became a target of the Federal Communications Commission, which regulates radio stations and other things, and they decided that the song was promoting illegal drug use. And so they sent out a directive to radio stations saying that if you play this song, you may lose your radio license. Well, the program director at the radio station I worked at never told any of us guys that, and we played the heck out of One Toke Over the Line. In 1970, in the UK, the band Mungo Jerry releases their second album, Electronically Tested, and it contains their only US top 10 hit. In the Summertime was a big hit, and according to Wikipedia, it was one of the world's biggest selling singles of all time. The song was written by lead singer Ray Dorset, and he says it only took him 10 minutes to write. In the Summertime celebrates summer, of course, and as a result, it gets played regularly on classic rock radio stations in the summertime. Now, Mungo Jerry never had another top 10 or top 20 hit in the US, but they did continue to have hits in the UK. Arlo Guthrie is probably the most known for his debut album and the long song that's on there called Alice's Restaurant, where you can get anything you want except an Alice. But that was not his hit. He only had one-hit wonder, and it came out in 1972 on his fourth album, Hobo's Lullaby. And the song is called The City of New Orleans. And there's a couple of great stories about this song. The song describes a train, an Illinois Central line train, that goes from Chicago all the way down to New Orleans, called the City of New Orleans. And I know because I took this train a lot. Because when I first started college, I was a student at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. And I'd get on the train in Chicago and take it all night long through all these little stops. It was kind of like a mail train. It stopped everywhere. Until the next morning, we would arrive in Carbondale, where you'd have to jump off the train and quickly get to your first morning class. And then the train would continue on down to New Orleans. Now, a few years later, I'm in Los Angeles, and I'm working at a radio station, and Hobo's Lullaby comes out, and here's this song, The City of New Orleans. And I can't tell you how thrilled I was that there's Arlo singing about the train that I used to ride all the time. Now, the second story about the City of New Orleans is Arlo didn't write it. It was written by Steve Goodman. And Steve was in a bar, and he saw Arlo. And he walked up to Arlo and he said, "I'd like to play a song for you." And Arlo said, "Well, you can, but only if you buy me a beer." So Steve bought him the beer and played the song. And that is how City of New Orleans became Arlo Guthrie's only one-hit wonder. Our next one-hit wonder star comes from the UK, where he was not only a singer, but he's also an actor. And the song came from a movie, and the movie was called That'll Be the Day, which was about a young up-and-coming mod who wanted to be a rock star, and the star is David Essex. But there's another star in that movie, and that is Ringo Starr. Yeah, he appears in the movie as well. And in the movie is the song that is David Essex' one-hit wonder, and that is Rock On. Rock On sold over 5 million copies. And on the success of the movie That'll Be the Day and Rock On, it was decided to make a sequel. And this movie was called Stardust. And in this movie, David Essex played the same character who was now becoming a worldwide rock superstar, and then he destructs. Now, he's continued to record, and he's had some hits in the UK and Europe, but never more in the US. He's also appeared in many British TV shows and in the West End on stage in London as well. And he continues to act. Rock on, David Essex. Our next one-hit wonder in the 70s captured the world's attention by singing about sex in the afternoon. Now, members of the band started their career writing songs, co-writing songs with John Denver, including I Guess He'd Rather Be in Colorado and, of course, Take Me Home, Country Roads. Starland Vocal Band released their first album, called that, in 1977, and it contained that song about sex in the afternoon, Afternoon Delight. And that song rose right up to be #1. I guess there were an awful lot of people who liked the idea of sex in the afternoon. Nonetheless, the band could never, ever get that excited about anything again, and so by 1981, they had broken up. Our next one-hit wonder artist is Nick Lowe, and it's hard to even think of Nick Lowe as being a one-hit artist. I mean, what a career this guy has had. He started out in a group called Brinsley Schwartz, and I did an earlier episode on that. And then he wrote a hit song for Elvis Costello, which was called What's So Funny About Peace, Love, and Understanding. And in 1979, Nick Lowe has his one-hit wonder, which is called Cruel to Be Kind. I got a good story about Nick Lowe and Elvis Costello that I'd like to share with you. A couple years after Nick's album came out and Elvis was starting to become a big, big draw, I was on a business trip down to Australia. Now, it was my first time to Australia, and I was staying at the Park Hyatt right by the Sydney Opera House, where I'd look out my windows and there was a Sydney Opera House. It was very, very cool. And I was wondering what Aussies were really like, so I tried to do a lot of tours around the city. Well, it turned out the hotel had a concierge, and I had seen in the local paper that that evening Elvis Costello and Nick Lowe were appearing at a big concert. And so I went to concierge and I said, "Can you get me tickets?" And he says, "No worries, mate." And so he did. And I remember going into the concert, and it was jammed. It was just like being in the Forum in LA. And I was thinking, I wonder if it will seem different. You know, is this audience different from US type audiences? Nick was the opening act, and he was terrific. And then Elvis came out and brought down the house. It was just like concerts at home. Rock and roll is definitely international. In 1977 in the UK, there was a duo that was called the Bugs. And they were performing, and a guy walked up to him and said, "You know, the Bugs will never be as big as the Beatles." So they decided to change their name. And in 1980, the new band released their first album. This was called The Age of Plastic. And the name of the band was the Buggles. And it has their one-hit wonder on it. And it became a huge international hit because on August the 1st of 1980, this brand new television network called MTV started playing music videos 24/7. And the first music video that they played was by the Buggles, and it was called Video Killed the Radio Star. But they couldn't follow it up. In 1981, they recorded their second album, Adventures in Modern Recording, and then they broke up. While they were making their second album, they were in the same studio where Yes was recording an album, or trying to anyway, because two members of Yes had just left. And so as a result, they recruited the two members of the Buggles to come and join Yes. And they recorded the album called Drama. So then they went out on tour, and they got kind of mixed reactions, and then Yes disbanded. It's a band that started playing clubs around the Sunset Strip. They started getting some notoriety. Record companies started to take notice. And all of a sudden, the record labels are bidding against each other to see who can sign this great new act. And Capitol wins by giving the band the biggest recording contract, the most amount of money that Capitol had ever given to any group or artist. And Capitol then starts a promotional campaign saying that this band are the next Beatles. And sure enough, their album comes out and the single comes out, and the single goes directly to #1, becomes a big international hit. The band is the KNACK, and the song is My Sharona. Sharona is a real person, Sharona Alprin, who was Doug Fieger's, the lead singer and guitar player, girlfriend. The song was written in 15 minutes. They never married, and Sharona became a realtor in LA. The KNACK received some bad press and a pushback from all that capital PR nonsense of being the next Beatles. And so they did have another hit with Good Girls Don't, but it wasn't anywhere close to the success of My Sharona. They continued on and recorded 7 more albums, but could never, ever get back to the joy of My Sharona. There were a lot of one-hit wonders that came out in the 70s, and I've only touched on a few. But as usual, I have a Spotify playlist. Here's the link for it, where you can check out and listen to some of these great songs. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this look at some one-hit wonders from the 1970s. I'm sure there are a lot more that we haven't even begun to talk about. In the meantime, as I always say, keep a rockin'. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.